Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Invictus staff chat. We are back once again, this time talking to our co-staff member, our confidant, our expert, our friend. This is Jake. Hi, Jake. Welcome.
Hello. I'm distracting myself by having our faces on screen twice. Excuse me.
Too many
Let
instances
me
of us.
let me put that Twitch window out of the way. Okay.
And with us as well, as she always is, helping me out, is Alex. Hi, Alex.
Hi, it's good to be back in my own spot.
So Alex is going to be in the chat with you guys, taking your questions and passing them off to Jake. So if you have questions during the course of this particular discussion that you want to throw in there, make sure you put them in the chat. Alex will scoop them up. She'll get them to me or to Jake. I can sit back and do nothing, which is what I will gladly do. Before we begin, I wanted to throw a couple of things out there to all of you, let you know what's going on. First of all, if you're not on the Facebook, go over to the Facebook. We have active voting for the teasers that are coming down the line. We have info skill stuff. There is more cool stuff coming. We've been... this is what our staff meetings are now, and it's been really fun, and there's some really awesome stuff coming out soon, so you want to make sure you're on the Facebook to check that out. Second part of that is next week this week we have Jake. We're really excited about that. Next week we have Mickey. We'll be doing some in-depth discussion with Mickey, and that's the staff. You'll have seen all of us. So the question that we have for all of you, and I will bring this back up at the end of the show, is what else would you like to see from us? What other things that are Invictus relevant would you like to see us talk about in this slot? And maybe the answer is you're good. That's fine. But if you've got things you want us to talk about, let us know. That's the best way that we can start to compile a list and see if there's a desire for us to do a little more of these discussions and chats as time goes on. So think about that, percolate on it, and let us know when you get the opportunity to. But in the meantime, in the now time, for this block of time, we're going to have a discussion with Jake. Jake, I'm going to start this conversation the way I start all of our conversations here on this show. How did you get started LARPing? How did you come across this hobby?
Oh boy. All right. So I got involved in a cult on the internet. You picked a great time to take a sip. You knew what was coming.
That's perfect. No, continue.
Hijinks ensued. I ended up hanging out with Dan Comstock at a New Year's party.
Okay, so that's too few details for this particular setting. So you found a group on the internet that I assume Dan Comstock was in some way the mastermind behind, or a driving force behind.
Just one of the, just kind of one of the clones that crawled out of the ooze.
Perfect.
Of that particular online cesspool.
And so you met him at a New Year's party.
And... we had talked a long time. I was in high school. I lived in Hawaii at the time. Moved back to the correct side of the country, where we all live. And I was like, "Yo, we should hang out." And I said, "That seems dangerous, but okay." And then the next step was, "Hey, Jake, you should come LARPing with us." And at that point, I was 7 drinks in. You get what yeah.
You agreed. Where did your LARPing career start then?
I started playing Madrigal 2. That would have been spring 2009.
You and I started playing like at the exact same time.
Yes,
exact same game.
I recall that. I think so. Yeah, we went into the forest in a little trio. I think you were playing a very different character than the one you ended up.
I was, yeah. I was playing. It was bad. It was terrible. It was a great first character. Let me tell you that. So you've been LARPing now for a good amount of time. Have there been other games that you've been connected up with in the community since you started LARPing 11 years ago?
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's a number.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Magical had PC'd up and Magical 2 PC'd from then all the way up until its finale. And I've continued to play the sequel. I didn't play anything else for a long time. I would NPC games. I NPC'd Lost Eidolons for a spell, Mirror up until its cancellation. And that's, I think, where Mickey and I got to know each other. Mickey also played Magical, but we didn't interact as players in that game. But I kind of fell into this role where myself and my friend Mark Lusty would often be the people to help Mickey enact his bizarre will on the players of Mirror. And we just had a fantastic time doing it.
This is a better intro to LARP story because Mickey in the chat says you can't yada yada past Dan Comstock.
it's impossible. Trust me, that yada yada is to get past a lot of other characters.
That's fair.
Mm-hmm.
Fair.
Not LARP related, and I'm desperately trying to keep it on topic for the sake of the viewers.
So you NPC'd for a couple of things, but is Invictus the first time that you've been like a full writing staff member, or did you do some of that with Mirror, or?
No, that was the very first time I was a staff member. A lot of people thought I was staff at Mirror just because I tended to do a lot of persistent face rolls, but no, Invictus is the first time I came on board to a staff team proper.
What was that transition like for you? What have you noticed about the staff side of things that maybe, we'll start with, how was that transition?
The amount of time spent thinking about LARPs when you're not at LARPs is a lot more. Excluding, there's like the brief window of time when you start a new LARP as a player and you're thinking about it all the time. Like, all the time. Mm-hmm. That honeymoon period when it's real good. And it's your brain is sparking with creative ideas and whatever. But that, tapers off, and eventually the LARP you play could just kind of fits into your cycle. Staffing, especially in the run-up to it, and the kickoff, is just... you're there every single week. You're trying to think about something related to it.
Yeah. It's pretty much a I think at least for me, it was like pretty much a constant thinking about, and then like having to schedule time to get those thoughts into a form anyone else could ingest.
Yeah, and that was certainly a learning process that I still continue to undergo, because I consider myself a very effective on the ground thinker and actor. I can do things, I can work in the moment very, very well. And I think that's what made me a very effective, persistent NPC. But the back end and the masterminding is a whole different ballgame that I kind of rely on everyone else on staff to carry a lot of that weight, because it is not something I take too naturally.
So what is it about this hobby that hooked you? What is it that really got you to stay with this LARPing?
I think in a lot of ways I was very lucky. Just my first event was very cool and impactful. Like, I think there are some people, in fact, I've known people who kind of went to a first event that was maybe like, oh, that was interesting, but like, I came into Magical 2, and that was an event where the Ancient Enemy of the East, for anyone who played that game, showed up Friday night. So I was surrounded by like squid head monsters and people yelling and screaming, and it was just like, I had come from this position of a total outsider who had a neutral to maybe slightly negative impression of what LARP is, and then just had my mind completely blown. Right, like there were lighting effects, there was weird gurgling squid head sounds, people just screaming out, like being surrounded by 100 people who are all taking this ridiculous thing completely seriously is a very interesting, and I found pretty addictive experience.
That's interesting that you put it that way, because I completely agree. I was in a very similar boat when I showed up. I was not super high on the idea that I was going to enjoy myself. I thought that I was I was going because someone had basically press ganged me into it, and I wasn't going to be super intrigued by it. But then after the first fight, like the very first field fight, that friend kind of pulled me aside and was like, "What do you think?" And I was just like, "I'm in, hard in forever," because it's such an experiential thing that is difficult. It's certainly it's impossible to describe to somebody. You have to really be there and be immersed in it to get that, and it is cool. So you do a number of you've done a number of writing projects with Invictus as you've been a part of the staff. You do writing for you've done some Caelid stuff. You do writing for the Blood Witches, which are always a perennial favorite. And the have done some writing for the Golem stuff as well, which is a big hot button topic around. So I'm excited to dig into that a little bit.
I guess.
Let's start with the Caelid Circle, though. Let's talk a little bit about your role with the Caelid Circle, how you got connected up with that, and where you've taken that.
Okay, so I think initially I only had a very minor contribution, which is that the concept of the Scald of Heaven and the Cult of Dinara is something I brainstormed and wrote the initial kind of thought seed for. It's been since developed out more thoroughly, but I wasn't really planning to do a whole lot with it. I think I was asked because just as we were in the run up to the first game, we have, how many nations do we have in this campaign? A lot more than staffers. So as it kind of shook out, it's like, can you take on this one? I was like, yeah, all right. And I don't know, it was kind of interesting to think my way through the background like knowing what we had set up for the Caelid Circle and what was true about them. What did that mean for a society that characters would ostensibly be from? What's the general attitude? Usually I would say the Caelid Circle in concept is kind of the polar opposite of the Kissarat, partly because of their material conditions. I would say mostly because of their material conditions.
Yeah.
Coming from a harsh desert environment versus a verdant, highly hospitable one is those will produce different cultures. Let's say.
Yeah, no less angry. I've learned.
Yeah, they're all into swords conveniently for the sake of plot and conflict.
The Caelid Circle have a lot of elements that I think are interesting juxtapositions. They are not elements that LARPers might be unfamiliar with. They are certainly things that you might pick up in various different cultures in other games, but very rarely are they put together. Did you find that to be a difficult dichotomy to work with when you were setting up some of these elements?
Yeah, so I remember one of the early ideas we had, and this was in the group brainstorming session, the idea that they are ruled by a gerontocracy. It is a rule by elders. But then we had to kind of come up with okay, what does elder status really mean? How do you get it? Is it a hard age limit? In this case, it's not really a hard age limit. It has more to do with the esteem you've accumulated over the course of your life. And then this kind of idea, various nested circles of elders that in your local community, there's probably the dozen or so who kind of make most of the decisions, but that there are, progressively larger circles who are in charge of more things. And then there is the highest circle who are, the big poobah in charge of whatever you would consider a national issue for a nation that is barely coherent as a nation. That's what they do. It's very loose, very anarcho-syndicalist.
Perfect. So the stuff that you have been doing with the Blood Witches. One of the things I love about the way that the Blood Witch plot has unfolded is that, like, I personally, this is why I love LARPing with a staff like this. I personally tend to be very good at like this level, right? Like like looking over the whole campaign and like
the super macro,
yeah. And the stuff that you've been doing with the Blood Witches is so personal for those Blood Witches, like for those PCs, and it's been really cool to watch that interactions with your characters unfold. So let's talk a little bit about that plot line and where you sort of pull that from.
Yeah, I have to, unpack a couple ideas because it certainly changed in the evolution. But yeah, I think it was sort of a general idea that healing was not going to be goodly clerics of light and holiness. That we wanted to put some texture into it. And gosh, I'm trying to recall exactly. I had come across in reading something else the concept of something called a pharmakon, which is a Greek word, and it refers to an old-fashioned ritual of emptying a communal's badness or sin into a vessel and banishing it or destroying it. That idea evolved into the pharmakosi, which is this like altar of cursed magic that is drawn upon to heal the bodies of the wounded, which creates this dichotomy of, yeah, we need them, but oh my god, this is disgusting. It's like kind of by its nature, it's repellent. Like it's a thing that you don't want near you, but is also a vital part of sustaining the community, especially if you're an outpost on a hostile world that constantly gets itself involved in political machinations.
So the character that you play, that you are primarily interfacing with these with the Blood Witches on, how have you brought those elements into the character to try and I guess sell that to the PCs?
Yeah, so that character, Julian Lawrence, has the distinction of being like, he's a Julian, which means he's a member of like one of the major aristocratic families of the Alaran Empire, but he also has this profession that is not something you get to talk about at fancy dinner parties. And so there's this kind of thing where he's usually walks very straight backed, kind of has this like not sneering but almost sneering demeanor when he's among the general public. As soon as he's around just Blood Witches, it drops very quickly into just talking shop, much more informal, much more like, all right, I got a weird idea. Let's try this thing. Only tell people if you think they're cool. Don't bring anybody who's not cool.
Are there specific themes that you are trying to dig into with the Blood Witch stuff that you have put together? Are there elements of story that you're trying to bring forward that PCs might want to have some insight into?
Let me think. I guess broadly the theme of whether or not your character is willing to do something that they think is necessary or that aligns with their personal ambitions that may not be something your friends would approve of, or people, other people that you have to answer to would approve of.
Playing with some ends justifying the means.
Mm-hmm.
That's fun.
And I think just grossness. I it was the last event or the event prior where I had them digging through bowls of red jello to find like weird knobbly bits to represent a planet where a Blood Witch ritual had backfired and turned most of the surface into a giant amoeba.
Right,
made of semi-sentient blood. It's a good time out there in the universe.
So let's talk a little bit about golems. You have you have built a lot of that golem structure that has come in game in terms of the plot and what people have seen about golems. What is it about the golems that the golem plotline that excites you, and what are you interested in pursuing with that?
So when I was kind of thinking about it, because like the idea is like golems exist in the setting, like okay, what does that mean? And I forget what I was reading. But I got kind of into the idea of the classical golem, as in the Jewish fable, of the idea of this being made of clay that has writing inscribed on its forehead. And I thought, okay, that's kind of like the most singular detail that comes from the classical idea. So from that, I came up with this concept of having, there's runes, like golems are distinguishable by runes. And I think we had already talked about making golems that are human-like, so that people could play them without necessarily building a gigantic, elaborate costume.
Mm-hmm.
And that's our alchemized golems. But it's like, how do you make them distinctive and stand out and make it very clear what they are? And that became the runes that go on their hands and head. There is a reason that they're like that I don't believe has hit players yet. So,
yep, that's okay. We are aware of secrets, and we are happy to keep them secret, lest the decision of whether or not we do things beyond next week is taken from us by Mickey, and not.
Oh yeah, Mickey was the one to first say canceled by Mickey, so that works. Also, the other Jake says you mispronounced toasters.
Yeah, yes, the fleshy toasters.
Actually, we have a question in chat. Mary
Sure.
Ferry asks, what has been your favorite plot, yours or another's, that has been done for the game so far?
A really recent one that comes to mind was a time-sensitive thing that involved running 2 mods back-to-back, because one involved a NPC that was, I believe, the hook, or was like the escort, and a different group of PCs, which is the one I was leading, had to go infiltrate his office at that time. And watching how that played out and went in a direction, we'll call it. that went a way. That was pretty fascinating, and I just think it's very clever and ambitious to try and do stuff like that in a hobby where it's so, like, the most ubiquitous thing you learn starting LARPs is that nothing is on time ever. I know that's Mickey's personal crusade. And I like to think that we've actually been more than a little bit successful at actually, like, making time work in our favor.
At the very least, comparatively.
Yeah,
right.
Definitely. Comparatively is very... yeah.
At the very least, we do a good job compared to other productions.
Mm-hmm. We also had another question earlier that we switched topics before I could get to, of what was the last straw that got you onto staff?
Let's see, what was the final thing that made me agree? When was this? How long ago did we start planning this thing?
Oh God, that depends on a lot of factors.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, you're right. That's an extremely nebulous question. I don't know. Mickey and I were having a call about something completely different. He had just, like, the day before, I think, announced that Invictus 2 was going to happen. And he and I were having a call about something that was not LARP related. And he said, by the way, you're staffing. And I was like, that's fair.
Not a question. Not a question. You didn't decide, you were told.
Yeah, got voluntold. That was fine. We'll say that there was sufficient rapport built up ahead of time whereby that actually made sense. I was not actually, mind controlled or blackmailed or any such thing.
So, getting back to golems a little bit, are there some things that you are looking forward to on the golem front that you are hoping to see play out?
Yeah. I was gonna say yes. Players have actually introduced ideas that I was like, oh, we shouldn't do that, but you asked, so yeah, trying to like understand why they work the way they do, why some golems become aware of themselves and can act as independent people. There are reasons for those things,
Mm-hmm.
and it's definitely part of the intended experience that people will figure it out.
That
If
is, yeah.
necessary, by us, leaving a trail of breadcrumbs. But if they get clever and ask the right questions and uh, you know,
I
provoke the
think
right
you
NPCs.
may have just summed up Invictus in one sentiment. Is that the things that are happening in this game, all the things have reasons.
Yep.
And if you'll get it eventually, or if you're clever, you can stumble on a lot of this a lot faster.
No, this is an eminently speed runnable game. Like, right? Like if you knew the hacks and just kind of like did a back step into the right corners and clip through the geometry, you will just jump to the final boss. I'm exaggerating very slightly.
I think only a little.
We're talking like about that much.
So now that you have had an opportunity to be on a staff for a little bit, we've run a few events. So you've done things from a player standpoint, you've done things from an NPC standpoint, and you've done things from a staff standpoint. On site, what do you see as the major differences between those three camps?
That's interesting. I feel like on site, because it's my comfort zone, I kind of put myself into the NPC shoes most of the time, acting as kind of like an empowered NPC, like one that can kind of make a lot of decisions on the fly. Because the macro level stuff, I'm really just relying on the schedule to stuff. If the plan we've already set in motion, if that has to change, I'm relying on other staffers who have a better view of that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Because I find it very confusing and baffling, and I'm usually tired and running out of calories and just generally disoriented. So that kind of like high level planning is not available to me.
That's why I store so many calories before I come. That's the only reason.
But yeah, like it couldn't be more different from the player experience, either of those things. Because one is go, 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 never stop. And as we always, as players, you're often waiting unless you really know how to be involved in everything and have really good timing. You're going to have downtime. I've gotten to the point where I kind of appreciate having a breather in the middle of a weekend. I don't like to be sprinting towards all the content at maximum speed. I get grouchy.
Are there elements from what you have picked up as a staff member that you have taken back with you as a player, and other elements you've picked up from other games as a player that you've brought with you as a staff member?
Yeah, definitely like spending some time. I would say, spending some time as an NPC definitely helped, but definitely being involved in the staff production affected the way I play. In particular, Madrigal 3. I also currently play a game called Damarung, but it has a very fundamentally different structure, so it doesn't quite work the same way as a player experience. But kind of knowing what staff needs to progress a plot and what things are very difficult for them to work with. Because definitely sometimes a player hands you an idea and you're like, that's interesting. I can do nothing with this. You've given me a very interesting paperweight of an idea. I think I'm better attuned at kind of like knowing picking up like a mod hook or a prominent NPC that's played by a staff member or something. Like, I can kind of pick out what are the right questions, what are the right things to ask of them, and also very much when's a great time to stop and say, I think we've talked enough. maybe you have other things to do. Because as a purely selfish player, that would never come up.
Sure. So, having now had an opportunity on staff, do you think that that will alter the way you build your characters and write your character histories for games that you play in the future?
Probably. I've definitely in the past done character histories that were very scattershot. Like I got a little bit of everything because like you don't know what you're gonna hit. When it comes to games, there's definitely things that are been retconned out of my Magical 3 history because I'm like, that wasn't worth pursuing, or it's just too much, or it's just not relevant to how I enjoy playing that game.
Right.
At this point.
Sure.
Yeah, just kind of knowing like, because you can read a rulebook and be like, oh, somebody's really excited to run this. Based on how it's written, it's like this is my thing. I'm interested in it, but it also sounds like whoever made this is really excited to make something happen with it.
Right.
Learning how to hone in on that, I think, is a valuable thing to keep in mind when making a character go in the future. And that did come out in Damarung, I think, somewhat because that was a game where it benefits you tremendously to play to the game as intended. I think Invictus is pretty similar. Like, the more you lean into what's been made, the better time you'll have being creative with the tools that are already there for you, rather than trying to, this is kind of leads into the very obvious, like, don't make the special snowflake character. I think there are probably games where getting real creative with it might really work out. But if you can like pick a piece of the setting and be like, okay, my character is this, and I'm gonna be this, and I'll play it to the hilt exactly as they intend it, that will almost always yield a better result.
Yeah, and I do agree. I think there are certainly some worlds where that are a little almost more like a little bit of a sandbox, right? Like where people have expected a little bit more of an open-ended feedback loop from the players in that phase, and they are looking to meander a bit, right? And Invictus is not a game that meanders.
That is.
Yeah. Invictus is kind of a sprint.
We're going in a direction.
Yeah. And I think that's great advice that you've stumbled onto for people who are looking to create a character and be a part of the world in Invictus, is find something that excites you. And if you can locate it in that book and you can feel the energy coming off of it in that way, that means that we're there to pour back into it. And pretty much anything that you latch onto and that you feel excited about the world, we're going to find a way to make that feedback loop continue. And I think you're right. You got to find what lets you anchor into this world as opposed to just sort of playing in your own world that happens to be in Invictus.
Yeah.
We're happy to come and hang out with you.
There's a couple people who can do that. Yeah, there's a couple people who can play in their own world successfully, but they tend not to go on mods.
Right. There's room
on
for
that topic. On that topic, what would be your advice for a new player of Invictus?
That's a good question.
It's my personal favorite question.
Yeah, probably do some reading. There's information that the community has already gathered, but even if you're not inclined to do that much, there's definitely people who already know stuff. So playing at least somewhat inquisitive character, because we kind of often want to play someone who's pretty cool, at least a little bit, but being willing to like, hey, can you tell me about this thing? You seem to know about this. That's a pretty good tactic because there's definitely like, how would I put it? You kind of want to have your feet really on the ground as far as the setting goes, because it is a very intricate and very, it's an interesting setting, but there's a lot to it. And if you're running with your kind of default, I'm gonna call it kitchen sink Greyhawk D&D fantasy, you are really gonna miss the mark on a lot of the most interesting stuff.
Yeah, and I think it is the deviations from that are going to be the most interesting part that you're missing, right? You know, our world has monsters in it. It has some things that are familiar, but it's what is not familiar about those familiar things that really define them in our setting, I think.
Yep.
And so if you were to be a player, let's say that you had never read the mystical documents with their legally binding warning at the top, and you were to become a player of this game. My mouse just hanging out in front of my face the whole time. That's cool. That's fine. But if you were to become a player of this game, what kind of player, what would you be building to interact with the world of Invictus?
Like if I was just playing it?
Yeah.
I mean, I'd play a Blood Witch. I'm incredibly biased.
Hey, that's good.
Yeah, no, that is the reason it's the way it is because that's absolutely my jam. It's in some ways a very indulgent part of the game.
Would you still paint
it's
yourself?
where I have the most personal fun.
Would you still paint yourself entirely gray?
Probably not. Probably not.
Yeah, I think the Blood Witch stuff that you guys have been putting together with that, it's super fun. And every time we do one of these, we hear from the Blood Witch crowd in the audience who are excited about that. So it's a very cool element of our world that you're doing awesome with.
Well, thank you. And I just like to imagine the conversations that the Blood Witches have in their corner of the tavern, and just the sentences that other people overhear from them are probably really great. I like to think about that.
Yeah, I like to believe that any team that has like a Blood Witch, that they come back to like, oh, what did you do? And they're like, you know what? Never mind. I don't want to know what you did. It's best if you just don't tell me.
It's also been interesting to develop that with a sensitivity to, the game has blood in it, obviously, and violence, but doing it with a sensitivity to making sure people can participate without being surprised by something that's very gory or something that's potentially very upsetting. And built into the game already are some safety mechanics that I think they go out in like the opening ceremonies. Luckily, nothing like that has really had to come up. I think it sort of self-selects for the most part. But like this is a thing that involves the use of blood. Potentially that involves people using their own blood in Magic, but that looks like a person cutting themselves with a knife. There are reasons why you don't want to evoke that image too much or too strongly or surprise someone with it.
Right. That makes sense. And I think it's important to be cognizant. I mean, you are, right? So you're cognizant of that being a concern for some people. And so already just you have like a built-in support for that should it come up. So one of the other things, we're going to shift gears a little bit. One of the other things that you have been heavily involved in is the Darkling stuff that has gone on, the plot lines surrounding the Darklings. You have sort of been the groundwork for this particular plot. What are the elements of that plot that speak to you, and what have you really enjoyed about running this particular storyline?
Yeah, that's one I run for someone else who wrote it. That one has been a lot of fun, partly because the players who got themselves involved in it, they got themselves into some trouble with it. And both the players and the NPCs involved just like took it deathly seriously. And that is a really gratifying thing. I would say, to pull it back to what's advice for players, be willing to take something completely seriously, because that is very motivating and will yield good rewards from staff running things for you. I
want to touch on that. I want to touch on that.
It's really cool.
Yeah. I want to touch on that real quick. I think that any time that you can, like all things, you're going to get what you put in, right? To a degree. So you're absolutely right. If you're a player and you heavily invest in something, we as a staff, we're going to put hooks out there, right? Some things players are going to take, some things players aren't going to be interested in. And no one on staff is, writing hooks for things they have no interest in.
Yeah.
So, when something does get picked up by a player and they heavily invest in it, you're going to see that investment, like, at least, not in a tangible payoff, like in terms of, you can't be ever sure what's going to happen in game, but you can be sure that there will be a connection made and that there's going to be a follow through on that. And at least with our staff, I feel like we have done a good job making sure that the elements of this world that are out there that players are interested in, there's something in there, and you can crack in there and find it. And the more you put into it, the more you're going to get out of it. The Darklings are a great example.
This whole...
Go ahead.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're definitely just like one of the monsters in the bestiary, really, to start with. But they kind of, they hit game, and some shit happened, and the people involved were like, "Oh my god, like this is life or death. This is the single most important thing in my life right now." I'm like, "Oh, okay."
and
I will inform the powers that be that that's the case.
There have been elements of the Darklings that were planned for, to speak to the speedrunning point, were planned for far down the line, would be things that we would talk about. And they're already out there. They exist. People know them. So like this is a reality of this game.
Yeah, no, they definitely just rocketed right to the end of that. Near the end of that. There's maybe some more, but
there's always more.
Just,
we'll always find more.
But yeah, just more of what you're talking about, getting out what you put in. It's that this whole endeavor is a lot more two-way than I think we often think of it, especially if you've only played. It's kind of, you were saying, like, no one's writing things they don't care about. I think it's easy to kind of forget that if you're on the player side. You kind of imagine, like, well, whether I'm here or not, they're going to be masterminding and creating this setting with or without me. It's actually less true than you think. I mean, in the obvious sense that there's no LARP if there's no players, duh. But, sometimes to greater or lesser degrees, depending on how much a given mod, matters or how much of an impression you make. I can't really make anything or come up with any ideas for the next game until my current ideas have hit an event. It's bounced off the players. I know what they care about. They've come up with ideas to throw back at me, and then I have my ideas for the next event.
Well, and I think it's easy
with that, I'd like to point...
Go ahead, Alex.
I was going to say, with that, I'd like to point out that earlier on in the stream, Wicked Loud Dude said, Darklings, thank you for making my team have a hard conversation in game 2.
You're welcome.
You'd like to know that.
Yeah.
I think as players, it's easy to see what the staff produce as a content hose, right? That there is just a never-ending flowing of story that, you're making choices and you're guiding things and you're interacting with, but that the story is coming and you're a consumer. But from a staff perspective, if we were writing a book or producing a television show or something like that, right? Some other medium with which to tell this story, we would have antagonists and we would have protagonists and we would write our protagonists to make choices and whatnot. We don't have protagonists under our control in this medium. That's the beauty of it, is that I've just got a fistful of antagonists. That's all I've got. And that
good luck.
The PCs are the protagonists. They are what is going to drive the story forward. And just as writers sometimes talk about characters making choices they weren't expecting while they sat down to write and it pushed the story in a different direction, it's like that every time, because we have no way to dictate how players are going to perceive what happens and how they're going to push things. And so we are in a constant state of there are some things in the world that are constants, but for the most part, how we get there is, and even some of those constants are variable. But for the most part, this world is driven by the players, and that's one of the most exciting things about it for a staff member. And I agree that once you see that, your relationship changes a little bit with even from the player side.
Yeah, no, I would agree with all of that. Like we said, there's information that's coming out. All of it's important to one extent or another, but which stuff you're going to find out first, that has been informed completely by what the players have decided is interesting to them, I think. Even though we have there's a defined timeline for certain things, but even with that, the knowledge that the player base has now is like 60% a factor of what they've decided they care about. And maybe 40% us steering the ship.
So are there elements from other LARPs that you've experienced, other games that you've played, or even other mediums and things? Are there elements of those that you're excited to bring to Invictus and to co-opt and restructure and repurpose as your own?
Yeah, and I might be rambling a bit while I talk my way through them, but my experiences with LARPs like Drachenfest and Damarung, they're very different kinds of things. They're not like Invictus in some very important ways. One being that there isn't that fire hose of content. It's very clear that you are not going to get much of anything unless you're going out and doing it. But it does encourage a real, like, playful spontaneity that sometimes is missing when a LARP feels too structured. When you're literally like, okay, I may not have the staff schedule, but I know I got something coming at 2:00, so I'm not going to do anything, even though my character might actually want something at this moment. That feeling, and also that feeling of I don't know, player empowerment that exists in those games. Like I play a character in Damarung. I'm a PC, but I play a clergyman who ended up politicking his way into the second highest position of political power that exists in that setting. Now that's a level of freedom that doesn't really work for the story that Invictus is. But I don't know. I like the idea that players can kind of, even if they can't reach those heights every time, that they're going to, push for them. That they're going to push the limits of what they think is allowable. Because I think sometimes, especially if you've been burned by LARPs that are not as well written, players can feel very shy about pushing the limits.
Mm-hmm.
They kind of just wait for the model to tell them what to do, and then they do that thing and say, okay, I'll see you next event. It's much more exciting, and this happens with pretty much every single thing that happens in Invictus is when, okay, here's what I think should happen next. And that's something I pretty much always provoke from the players I do mods with, if it's anything that I have a hand in writing, is like, wow, that sure was a thing we did. Here's what I think, but what's your opinion?
Right.
What's your take on that? What did you think of that experience? And some people take to it very naturally. Other people are less comfortable with that, having that level of choosing over what happens.
Alex, do you have anything else for us before we punch out?
We do, actually. Janice Kiltra in chat asks, what was your favorite experience you were a part of in Invictus so far?
Gosh. all of the biggest highlights for me tend to be Blood Witch moments because I play the hook out there, and that's where I get to live in this amazingly self-indulgent space of being a staff NPC, but also kind of acting like a player when I'm out among them. So, playing the big friendly NPC healer because there aren't enough Blood Witches for the fight we're about to throw at them because we're cruel and evil. There was like the very first thing, which was establishing the Altar of Blood, which was just like, it was super chaotic, but it didn't degrade into nonsense. Like it felt very hectic. A similar fight being, I am struggling to remember what they're going, but it was their first encounter with the Thalassy in a field battle.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
And I went in as a backpack healer, essentially, or like a the friendly NPC healer for that fight because, oh my god. And yeah, that I don't know. We do field fights really good, guys. I'm just gonna say, those tend to be really big highlights. Overall, any of the ones I'm awake for, which is not all of them.
I agree. They tend to be a lot of fun.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I want to say a huge thank you to Jake for coming and hanging out with us tonight and letting us peer a little bit into your mind space, sharing that with everybody. That's awesome, and we super appreciate it. So I once again want to run over a couple of quick things. Make sure you're on the Facebook so that you can vote for the teasers that are coming out so that you can be part of the info skills when they come around. We have nominations, and then there's voting, and then there's a reading to do afterward. There's some really cool stuff happening over there. Make sure you're there. If you have not already, press the follow button on this here page so that you can come back and listen to us again in the future, plus the other things LFE are doing, of which there are several. Our sister games, Coventry and Fealty, are doing cool stuff as well. So make sure you're coming to check out those discussions. I did not look to see if subscription is available yet.
It is not yet.
It's not available yet. Keep holding on to those Bezos dollars, and one day you can use your Amazon Prime subscription to throw some money this way also. That's free to you because you've already paid for it, and that's the best part.
You mean this follow button?
Yes, I do mean that follow button. Welcome as a follower. That's great. So if you haven't already followed, now's the time, because next week, Tuesday, 8 p.m., right here, same location, we're going to have Mickey on. I imagine that will be an interesting discussion with Mickey. I imagine he's not going to cancel himself, but I have no proof. I wouldn't put it past him. So we'll see how that breaks down. I do want to once again remind everybody that if you have ideas of things you would like to see going forward after we finish with all of our Invictus staff chats, throw them up on the Facebook or get in touch with one of the staff members and pitch your idea to us, and we'll be interested to see what people are thinking of. So if there's nothing else, Alex, anything else from you?
No, I think we're all set.
Then we are all set, and we have had a blast. Thank you all for coming to join us tonight. It was fun, and we will see you all back here Tuesday at the very least, because it's going to be good. Have a good night, everybody.
Yeah, good night. Thank you all both so much.